So from what I see here, we're up to Yesh Ben Arishonim, which is in the middle of the left column on page Gimel, and we're trying to figure out the Chumrah of Rabbi Zera, which is Benos Yisrael Echmir Al Atzmon Shafilu Ros Tipas Dam Kechardol Yosheves Zayin Nikiyim. And we said that even though it's impossible for one tipa to generate a status of a Zava Gedola, because you need 3 consecutive re'iyos on 3 different days, and she only saw a tipas dam kechardol, but nevertheless, there is a situation in which a tipas dam kechardol would require shiva nikiyim if she saw it as a re'iyah soteris, in the middle of her zayin nikiyim, in a case of a Zava Gedola. And then we discussed the Rambam, who writes that we have lost the ability to calculate Yemei Nidus and Yemei Zibus. And he writes, Bimei Chachmei HaGemara, Nistapik HaDovar, Harbe B'Re'iyas HaDomim, Diskalkulu HaVestos, Lefish Lo Yakoach, B'chol HaNoshim, Limnos, Yemei Niddah, Yemei Ziva, Lefichach Echmiru Chachomim B'Dover Zeh, the Gazu Shiyu Kol Yimeya Isha Yimei Ziva, that we gave the status of all the days as Yimei Ziva. And therefore, any dam that she sees, we consider it as a Safek Dam Ziva. But again, the Rambam doesn't tell you, even if I grant you the Rambam's premise that it's a Safek Dam Ziva, that doesn't mean that she's a Zava Gedola. Why does she need Zayin Nikiyim? One day should be enough as a Shemeretz Yom. So we're going to still have to come back to what the Gemara said about the fact that maybe in certain cases, one tipas dam would be a riyah soteris. Now he quotes the Ritva. He tells you that the Ritva is in Niddah Samach Vav, Shekosav Lamadnu ki chachamim kibu mehem kain. It's a Kabbalah. You know, sometimes you have a grassroots movement of a chumrah and a minhag, but this is already a Kabbalah. This already means that it was accepted, generation after generation. V'yasu osa takanat. So once they had the Kabbalah that many generations of women were already being machmir in that way, then they established and formulated a takana. Upashad isur b'kol ha'olam ve'koch levatla. There's normally, if you have a minhag that was a grassroots movement that evolved, then you can say that in a certain time period, Beis Din will come along and say, you know what, we're going to revoke this minhag. This is not a good minhag for us. But in this case, because it was a Kabbalah throughout the generations, and they made it into a takana, so it went through 3 stages. Stage 1, it was a grassroots minhag. Stage 2, it became a Kabbalah that was transmitted from one generation to the other. And finally, at some later generation, he doesn't identify when that happened, it became a takon. And the nafkamina is that there's no power, no authority to a Beis Din at a later date to say, you know what, we want to repeal this. We don't like this minhag. It's negative. It's not positive. It's too much. We can't do that because it was already elevated to the status of a takon. Now, are there situations, by the way, this is not for us today, where a later Beis Din can repeal an earlier takana of an earlier Beis Din? And that, as you know, requires what's called gadol mimenu b'chachma u'b'minyan. And the assumption is that we don't have a Beis Din today, maybe at the time of Mashiach we will, but in contemporary life, we don't have a Beis Din that's greater in chachma and minyan than the original Beis Din that made the takana. Like, for example, Lefi is daiti. Off the record, we don't take certain medications on Shabbos. I'm absolutely convinced that, given modern technology and the way they produce medications, this takana, this shvus would be repealed. But we don't have the power, the authority to do so. Ultimately, I think it's going to happen. That's don't take it with a grain of salt. But that's what I think can happen. That's just one example. There may be many examples where modern technology has changed the original reason for the takana and no longer applies, but we're still bound by the takana because we don't have a gadol mimenu b'chachma b'minyan. Okay. Now we're going to talk about Yom HaShvi. In the case of a Zava, Zava Gedola. On the seventh day of Hazayin Nikiyim, she can go to mikvah already in the morning with daybreak of the seventh day. And now we're considering every woman as if she was a Zava Gedola. And that should open up a possibility of tefillah on the seventh day in the morning. But then we have another problem here because maybe she's a Niddah. We don't know the difference between Yemei Niddah and Yemei Ziva. He says, Nidos bisman hazeh b'yom hashvi, harei hein safek zavos b'yom hashvi, misfiras Yemei Ziva, safek Nidos. In other words, let's go into the next day for a moment, right? So forget about Yom HaShvi. Yom HaShvi is not an option because a Niddah cannot be Tovelos on Yom HaShvi. She's full-fledged Tumas Niddah. But let's talk about the night after Shvi. That's already belongs to Yom HaShmini. So therefore, Bevadai, she'eno b'tov shivas yimei nidosim. If she goes to mikvah the night of the 8th, there's no question that she's left the status of a Niddah. Again, assuming she did a hefsek tara, she was mafsik, and she knows that the dam stopped flowing out. Shari sofru shiva nikiyim. So mimonafshah, she's already counted 7 clean days, so that covers Zava Gedolah. She's into the 8th day. She made a hefsek tara going into the 8th day. She's out of Niddas. So no matter how you slice the cake, she is able to go to mikvah. Keep going. Rasa Re'iyah Richona b'Shabbos. Okay, she saw the first Re'iyah on Shabbos. B'fsika b'tara b'Shabbos. B'bein hashmosha shel motzi Shabbos. So imagine a few hours after she saw the dam, she already made a hefsek tara, and there's no more dam. So she does this on Motzi Shabbos. Right? When we count 7 days of Niddas, we start and include the first day when she saw the Re'iyah. And now we go from Shabbos all the way to Friday. So when we get to Friday, we've already passed 7 days. So in other words, Friday is the 7th day of Niddas. Shabbos. Now she goes into Shabbos, a full week after her original Re'iyah. She's now in day 8. However, Rak le'inyan cheshbon yemei spiras haziva ain't Shabbos ololo. Let's try to figure this out. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos. So what's the problem with Shabbos? I don't get it. She made a hefsek tara. No, on Motzi Shabbos. That's the problem. If she made the hefsek tara on Shabbos, then l'chora the following Shabbos she should be able to go to mikvah, right? Because that would be the end of Zayin Nikiyim. But she made a hefsek tara on Motzi Shabbos. So if that be the case, then I guess we have to consider l'chumra as if she saw a dam on Shabbos. Which means that, just 1 second. So she saw a dam. No, I'm sorry. It's as if she saw a dam on Motzi Shabbos. Because it was only on Motzi Shabbos that she made a hefsek tara. And we always assume that she shofas dam up until the hefsek tara, which means that there was dam even on Motzi Shabbos. So that crosses Sunday off the map, off the list. So you're going to have to start counting Zayin Nikiyim on Monday. We get Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, and Sunday. Sunday will be the last day of Hazayin Nikiyim. So again, from a Niddah perspective, the fact that she saw Dam on Motzi Shabbos is totally irrelevant. And she could go to mikvah Friday night. But the problem is, we think she's a Zava. Well, we're afraid maybe she's a Zava. He says, because she only made hefsek tara after Shabbos. Next Shabbos, if you count from Sunday, will be day 7. The Sfiras Zivasa. So now if we've established if a woman makes a hefsek tara motzi Shabbos, then the following Shabbos is the seventh day of her ziva. She should be able to make a bitovelis b'mikvah on that seventh day. Shabbos, mishum shetiknu chachamim v'asru tfilas zava b'yom hashvi l'sfiras zivasa. Notice the Torah allows for a tefillah b'mikvah on the seventh day. The Rabbana, we're not going to allow that. We're going to have to wait till after she completes the 7 Nikiyim, when the seventh day is counted in its totality as a Yom Nut. Again, let's just go over this last paragraph in a very short summary. He's saying that if she sees Dam on Shabbos, and we don't know whether that Dam is Dam Niddah or Dam Ziva. Now, on Motzi Shabbos, she does a Hefsek Tara. That means that from a Niddah perspective, Shabbos was the first day of Hanidus, and Friday will be the last day of Hanidus. However, from a Ziva perspective, since she only made a Hefsek Tara on Motzi Shabbos, her first Yom Naki is going to be Monday. And if we count 7 days from Monday, so we end up on Sunday. Now, in theory, she should be able to go to mikvah on Sunday morning, because the only reason we're requiring that extra day is because of Safek Ziva. And in the case of a Zava, she could go to mikvah on the seventh day. But the Rabbana made a takana that a Zava can no longer, the leniency that the Torah formulated is no longer binding today, and we're not going to allow tefillah on the seventh day. So her earliest tefillah will be on the night going into the eighth day. Going into Monday, which is the night going into the eighth day. Okay. Anidos bisman hazeh harei asuros b'tefillah bayom. Okay, so this is another gzeira, which is called mishum srach bita, no tefillah by day. But you have to understand, Rabbi, that enactment is on a much lower level. Lower level meaning it's much more lenient than, for example, Yom HaShvi. Yom HaShvi is a very serious takana. But as far as Yom versus Laila, let's say, for example, she's already into her 8th day of Nidus. She could have gone to mikveh the night before, and it's the 8th day by daylight. We're not going to let her go to mikveh until the night going into the 9th, meaning that she could have gone the night going into the 8th. Why? Mishum srach bita. So let's review srach bita. Remember we discussed this. Her daughter learns the laws of Niddah by watching her mother, and she'll come to the mistaken impression if her mother comes back from the mikvah on a day that it's day 7 and not day 8, which on a deraisa level she's right. She could have gone to the mikvah on day 7. Well, that's not really true. She couldn't go to mikvah on day 7 because she might be in Niddah. But let's say in the scenario that we discussed before, where her first Riyah of Dam was on Shabbos, from a Niddah perspective, we start counting Shabbos as day number 1 of 7 days. Right, so she could have gone to mikvah from a Niddah perspective. she could have gone to mikvah on what? On Friday night, correct? On Friday night, right? Shabbos, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So Friday is the seventh day of her Niddah. That's what she saw on Shabbos. But since she made a hefsek tara motzi Shabbos, therefore, from a perspective of Zava, we have to be concerned that maybe her first riyah extended into motzi Shabbos, and her first of Zayin Akim will only begin on Monday. So he writes that if we would allow her to go to mikvah on day 8 during the daylight hours, her daughter watching her and imitating her mistakenly thinks that she's going to mikvah on day 7. That's why I mentioned to you before that the Rabbanon, that a woman should not go to mikvah on day 7 is a very serious matter. And even though the Torah allows it, we're going to be very hesitant to allow that. So much so that even if it's day 8, we're not going to allow her to go to mikvah on day 8. Because the daughter, is going to come out with the mistaken impression that it's day 7. So you see how many archokas we made to avoid tevilah on day 7. Which in the scenario that we said before, where she had dam on Shabbos and then she did have Sikara Motzi Shabbos, then the Torah would certainly allow her to go to the mikvah on what would be day 7 from a Zava perspective, which is day 8 from a Niddah perspective, because she made the Hefsek Tara Motzi Shabbos. And yet we're not going to allow it. The Torah would allow it to be monishim, no matter whether she's a Niddah or a Zava, it should be allowed. V'nechleku rishonim b'din zeh, im mikol makom yechola litbol b'shmini af biyom. So there's a footnote here, number Lamed Hey. Ein biru rabbi ben aposkim. Shagam harishon itiru tefillah samach lechat shecha. Lo omer kein el biyom hashmini. Shni divrei hakol. Ehei atefillah atzma b'layla. So in other words, it's before sunset. It's at the end of the day, and some poskim will allow tevilah at the end of the day, even though it's still day. But he says that's only on Yom HaShmini. On Yom HaShmini, no, it's an absolute no-no. No, there's no tevilah of samach l'chashecha at the end of the day. You've got to do the tevilah in the 8th day. Now, when we get to the 8th day, then the Rishonim and Poskim who are lenient and they allow her to go to mikveh before nightfall. And if I remember correctly, this became very relevant during Corona. Why? Because women were afraid to go to the mikveh at night. During the day, they cleaned up the place every time a woman went in. They, whatever they did in order to, guarantee that there was no hygienic problem. So the question was, would they allow tevilah before nightfall on day 8? So instead of going to the mikveh the night before, which normally she would have gone if not for Corona, can she go to mikveh before nightfall on day 8? So the post can write extensively about this. Oh, now they made the following condition: that if we allow her to go to mikveh before nightfall on day 8, that's only conditional on the fact that she doesn't show up at home until after nightfall. She only returns home at night. Again, this is the old srach bita business, because if she shows up, with her bag before nightfall, her daughter is going to mistakenly think that she went to mikveh by day. Now he has another sheet that says, that will let her go during the day to the Beis HaTfilah to prepare for the mikveh, but the actual immersion in the mikveh has to take place after night. So the big Mekilim will allow her to immerse in the mikveh before nightfall of the 8th day, but not to return home until after nightfall. And now we turn to page Dalit, it should say, but I have a little bit, it's erased here, so it's probably erased in the photocopy as well. Okay, now what we want to discuss here, the topic on the top of page Dalit, is where is this dam Niddah coming from? And at what point does she become Tmeya? So the name of the paragraph is Dam HaYotze Min HaMokar. So the Mokar is this mysterious place. I'm not sure if there's a biologically accurate translation of the word Mokar. I'm not sure. But it's somewhere in the uterus. And the dam goes from the uterus through her body until it goes out of her body through many different stages. It's not like the dam comes out of the mokar and then it's out of her body immediately. So the Chachamim give a mashal to this, and they always compare it to like a structure that has a second floor and a bottom floor, and it has how do you say in English? A prostor is a corridor. Excellent, thank you, corridor. Okay, so now there's something called a cheder. It's too bad he doesn't have a diagram. So let's read it through and we'll see if we can somehow, get a vision, a construction of what's going on. Hacheder v'prosdor v'haliyah. We have 3 parts. We have a cheder, we have a prosdor, and we have an aliyah. Hacheder mibifnim, v'prosdor mibachutz. So I think the prosdor is the corridor that leads from the cheder out of her body. So the dam starts in the cheder, goes through the prosdor until it comes out of the body. Unfortunately, it's a little bit erased here, and I'm having trouble reading it. It says Va'aliyah bnuya al shtein. What's the next word? Nekev. I'm going to assume it's v'nekev basuach min haliyah leprozda. There's some opening between the aliyah, which I guess is closer to the makar, and the prosdor, which is going to lead the dam out of her body. Shedarko, so through this opening that attaches or connects the aliyah to the prosdor, Yecholim lazuv damim min haliyah leprosdor. Dam hayotzi min acheder tame, dam hayotzi min aliyah tom. So it sounds like once the dam is in the cheder, it's already tame. But if it's higher up, because the aliyah is on top of the cheder, then it's dam tov. It doesn't mean the dam is not tummy. It's just it hasn't yet become dam tummy because it's still up in the aliyah. And there's going to be an opening, a passageway, taking the dam from the aliyah into the prosdor, and from the prosdor out of her body. So that very dam, which is now in the cheder, will become dam mitame. Okay, now we have dam shenimtza b'prosdor. So the dam is now coming from the aliyah through the pesach into the prosdor. It's still inside her body. Dama nimtza b'prosdor v'einon yodim im yotza min hacheder o min aliyah. Remember, we have to underline dam hayotze min aliyah tor. So there's dam that's coming from the aliyah, and there's dam that's coming from the cheder. Dam that comes from the aliyah is tor. Dam that comes from the cheder is tameh. Now she finds dam in a prosdor. We don't know if this is dam min acheder or dam min aliyah. If it's dam min acheder, it's tameh. If it's dam min aliyah, it's tar. So pamim shu tameh, upamim shu tar. Pamim shu tameh sha'anu tolim sheba min acheder. Pamim shu tar sha'anu tolim sheba min aliyah. This is Sugya Niddah on Daf Yud Zayin. And therefore he says in the name of the Rishonah, Shebizman Hazeh, Einon B'kiyim B'Mekomos Elu, Kol Dama Nimtzu B'Prosdor, Hareu B'Cheskas Dama Bo Min HaCheder, Utmeya. This is really wild. I mean, we're saying that dam in the prosler is only a suffix. So far, he hasn't told you on a Doraisa level what would be the status, but he's saying Bizman Azeh, forget it. It's all theoretical because we're going to assume that the dam came from the cheder and it's dam tomit. Is anyone here who could do some research for me in maybe Google or so? On a biological level, are there two types of menstrual bloods? Because he's saying that one is tummy and one is tar. If it came from the cheder, it's tummy. If it came from the aliyah, it's tar. And I don't think biologically you could differentiate between this dam and that dam. I'm curious to know that. Don't all volunteer at once. All right, now we have something called dam hanimtza bebeis hachitzon. That I think we'll leave for tomorrow. On the top here of Daf Dal. Okay, then let's learn some Masech Yevamos.